Hi, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Not the best.
Oh, sorry.
I called probably about, I don't know if it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or last week, but I spoke about hell at the time, and I come from an agnostic background. About 6 months ago, I just kind of went nuts and became very afraid of hell, and all I've really done in that time is read apologetics and counter apologetics and like every spare waking moment I have, and it's very miserable.
Teddy, which hell are you afraid of?
Well, mainly a Christian or a Muslim.
Why would you be more afraid of that than other potential bad afterlives?
Because I think there is slightly more reason to believe in those hells than the other ones that I've been presented with, and because they're the only ones that really say, at least generally speaking, if you don't have faith in this and believe it, then you will burn in hell and forever. So
basically, somebody has made a threat of a particular notion of hell, and I'm assuming you don't have any evidence that this hell is real?
I don't have evidence that hell is real, but
so somebody made a threat of a hell that scared you more than other threats of hell, despite the fact that there's no evidence that this place is real.
Well, so I'm concerned. I've gone over the apologetic arguments many times, and I think I spoke about this last time, and I'm not really concerned about really any of the arguments that would prove a deistic God, because those don't seem convincing to me, at least as I've gone through them, although I acknowledge the possibility that I could be wrong. Last week, there was in between the last time I called, there was an apologetics group that came to my school. It was it was some people with Ravi Zacharias or whatever his name is, and several other people. I don't know. Yeah, and it was another guy's name started with a T. I actually spoke to him Friday night, 20 minutes myself. Nice guy, but anyway. And then I went. They presented the argument for the resurrection, and I did a lot of studying with that, and I find a lot of convincing arguments that would both suggest that there is a lot of reason to believe, and there isn't a lot of reason to believe, and I mean it's kind of driving me nuts, because you have
Have you watched? Have you watched my debate against Mike Licona on the resurrection?
Licona?
Mike Licona versus me.
Yeah, I did, and I felt I don't. It's just there's a very large amount of evidence, and it's very confusing to me.
Really, because Mike presented no evidence. No empirical evidence. He spent the first half of the debate arguing about Ouija boards and trash cans flying in order to poison the well and make people think that there was a supernatural component to serve as a justification for his only argument that he presented, which is basically the Bible claims that Jesus rose from the dead. What empirical evidence is there that Jesus existed, died, and came back to life?
Well, by the very and I by the way, I agree that beginning part of the debate and a lot of other it was very silly on his behalf. But there couldn't exist or not a reasonable expectation of empirical evidence other than historical evidence in that particular case.
I understand.
Would you disagree with that?
So we don't have time machines. However, so if you're going with historical evidence, what you have is a bunch of reports and claims. But on occasion, those historical reports and claims have evidence supporting them. For example, I wasn't around when George Washington was president of the United States, and so I only have books full of claims, and we could just say, well, everything that's historical is just a tenet of faith, except that we have evidence for this, both people writing for and against, political cartoons of George Washington. We have a string of connected incidents leading from that to now. The issue, as Hume would address it, is you have to ask yourself, is it more miraculous that this event happened, as reported, than that someone would be intending to deceive or that someone has become deceived. Now, the idea that George Washington was president, is it more likely that George Washington was actually president and the evidence is largely accurate, or that somewhere between the founding of the United States and now, somebody made up a big lie and sold everybody on it? Which one of those is more preposterous? And Hume's advice is to reject the greater miracle. Note that Hume's advice is not accept the lesser miracle. That would be a mistake. But you should reject the greater miracle. And now, is it more miraculous that Jesus lived, died, and came back to life, or is somebody potentially mistaken or misrepresenting the events? Which one is more miraculous?
So in one sense, it is more likely that it was a legend or a deception.
Okay, all right, and stop, Teddy.
No, but
Teddy,
you can't put a probability
Teddy, stop.
I'm sorry.
You say in one sense it's more miraculous that he rose from the dead. In what sense is it not more miraculous that he rose from the dead? What fantasy land that you could tie to reality, is it less miraculous that somebody rose from the dead than that people misrepresented, misreported, or believed something that wasn't true?
Because you couldn't put a probability on a one-time supernatural event.
Okay, that's not the way this works.
Okay.
When you are assessing a claim, you compare it to similar claims. How many times has anyone ever been confirmed to be resurrected from the dead after 3 days?
So I don't think that's a fair claim, because I don't think any Christians would make the claim that this is something, I mean, other than, the little bit in the book of Matthew, but would make the claim that there is like any other time when anyone would rise from the dead.
It doesn't matter. See, this is the thing. This is the thing. If you would just answer the question rather than talking about what Christians would or wouldn't claim, we could actually talk about this in a way that allows us to determine what is reasonable to believe and what is not reasonable to believe. How many times has it ever been confirmed that someone died and rose from the dead 3 days later, or in this case, a day and a half later, that we're going to call 3 days?
Well, never, obviously.
Never. Okay. So given that we have 0 occurrences of this, how many claims are there that this type of thing has happened?
I don't know.
Several.
A lot. I mean,
not tons, but several. I mean, there are other, Jesus supposedly raised Lazarus from the dead. There are a number of died and risen saviors, although I'm not convinced that all of them necessarily fit, but at least one, and it seems to be several.
Okay.
Now, how many times has someone been convinced of something that was false, including miraculous things, when those things didn't actually ever happen?
A great number of times, obviously.
All day, every day, for the entire history of humanity.
Yeah.
So, given that, the burden of proof is on the claim that this actually happened. And so, to meet that burden of proof, you have to provide something more than, here's some people, unnamed people, anonymous people, that we can't interview, that lived 2,000 years ago, who claim that this happened. Well, by and large, when theists make the argument for the resurrections, the evidence that they sort, what's the most common piece of evidence cited by Christians to claim that the resurrection occurred?
The gospel?
No.
Oh, the empty tomb.
The empty tomb. Is there an empty tomb? Was that tomb filled with somebody before it was empty? Do we have any way to investigate that it was empty? Do we have any way to confirm it was empty? Do we have any way to confirm that there was somebody in there? Do we have any way to confirm what happened between the time somebody was in there and it was empty? Is there any way to investigate the empty tomb?
There's not, but wasn't there?
Correct.
That it was like that. Okay.
Now, if you look at the gospel accounts of what happened on that Easter Sunday, do they agree on what happened? Not
with all the details.
Not with hardly any of them. They don't agree whether the stone was rolled away ahead of time or not. They don't agree on whether or not there was an angel outside the tomb or not. They don't agree on who was there first. They don't agree on who was told first. They don't agree on anything. And so you have to get rid of all that fluff, which is why they go to the empty tomb, because the only thing that they mostly agree on is that the tomb was empty. One of them doesn't actually agree that the tomb was empty. When they enter the tomb, there's a young person in there that may or may not be an angel, so it's not empty. So the thing that they all agree on is that somebody went to this gravesite, and maybe the stone was already rolled away, and maybe it wasn't. And Jesus' body, which had been in there a day and a half before, was no longer there. Mm-hmm. I've seen better magic tricks on crap shows. Now,
yeah,
if this is something that we can't investigate, can we then say Jesus didn't exist, Jesus didn't rise from the dead? No, we can't say that. But they have a burden of proof to meet. And here's the stunner. You ready?
Yeah.
Isn't Jesus' resurrection the single most important fact about Christianity?
Yeah.
Isn't God supposed to be way, way smarter than all of us?
Yeah.
If God wants us to accept the most important fact, the resurrection, why the hell hasn't he provided any evidence? Where is the documentation? Why isn't God presenting himself to us and saying, yes, it's true, I said so? Why is it that we have to go back to an ancient book where there's no Bible, New Testament 2.0, no clarification, and we look at the accounts and they don't agree? Why is their God silent about the single most important facet of their religion?
I mean, I don't have an answer for that.
Nobody does.
And that's a very good. Can I just interject, because
Sure.
this is something that Tracy gave me a good answer with this too, but it's just something I've been I don't want to say like tortured with, but just like something that has been gnawing on me, because I go through these arguments again and again, and I'll find I don't want to say that I'm gullible, but I'm kind of gullible, and I'll find like the slightest argument in either direction and immediately do a 180, at least on a superficial level, and I'm so terrified of,
you don't have to be worried about that, Teddy. So here's the thing: there's lots of people who would
consuming my life.
There's a lot of people who would be viewed as gullible by outsiders and perhaps by themselves. As long as you recognize that you have a tendency to not do a detailed critical examination of something, to not be sufficiently skeptical. As soon as you realize that, then it should be pretty easy to train yourself to say, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. I don't have enough information to conclude this. I'm going to stop being terrified and stop accepting things until I have really, really good reasons, and not just when some apologist says something that I don't personally know how to refute. Because that's one of the dirty little secrets about apologists. Most believers sitting in the pews have no idea what their Bible says. They have no idea about the history of their religion. They don't know how to think skeptically. They don't have the tools to investigate, which is why when Josh McDowell writes evidence that demands a verdict and hands it to everybody in the churches, they're like, yeah, look, this smart dude just vindicated everything I believed, and now I don't have to do any work. Nobody knows this stuff. So don't beat yourself up for not being able to rebut something. You were curious. You called someone who may know, and I may be wrong, or I may not know. But when it comes to the fear of hell thing, for me, it was really simple. Why am I afraid of this particular hell more than another? Well, it's because it's the one that I was raised with, and it's the one that is most popular in the country I live in. If you had been raised in a Muslim country, you would probably have a fear of a Muslim afterlife.
Well, so I'll say something, like, I don't come from a really religious family at all. Like, they're super atheistic, agnostic.
You live in Gainesville, Florida. You're surrounded by religion, Christianity in particular, all the time.
I'm just going to college here. I grew up in like Jewish South Florida, so but like atheist Jews kind of. But
you shouldn't have moved.
You know, it's because.
Yeah, you're slumming it, man.
But
anyway, go ahead, continue. And I want to let Don jump in on this too, because I don't want to talk the whole time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, but just, and I do notice that. So I'm actually like right now kind of going through a Christian like kind of phase with it, but I've noticed that like during this whole like crazy thing, like I'll feel like really scared of Christianity, and then I'll like go like read the depictions of like the Muslim hell, which is a lot like more clear, and then I'll kind of like switch over to being more afraid of that one for a while, and I'll get dragged into like the Muslim apologetics with like, you know, the infallibility of the Quran or whatever, and that'll last a week or two, and then I'll hear like some stupid argument for Christianity, and it bounces back and back, and it's like I've never really dealt with this in my life, and it's just like I'm aware that it's an emotional thing, but it's just like consuming me like this like bat that's like living in my throat, and I can't.
You have to recognize that somebody could come up to you every single day with a new threat that you can't prove, and then you'll be scared of that threat. You have to start to realize that the time to believe something is after the evidence is presented, and the time to be afraid of something is when there's good reason to think that it's real and a threat. Because while you're sitting around terrified of some threatening afterlife, what facets of your actual life are being negatively impacted by you worrying about what might happen in somebody's afterlife?
Well, I mean a lot, but again, I mean, in the argument like that, that crazy bit of my brain is like, if hell isn't real, this is like the most irrational theory you could have, and if it is the most rational theory you could have, because it's like literally the worst thing that you could conceive of.
So I hate to tell you, but that's a really lengthy tautology, which says if hell is real, then there's good reason to be afraid of it.
I know. And I know it's not a logical thing, and I know it's just an emotional. I don't like appealing to Pascal's wager because I see how stupid it is, but I keep, at least in an emotional level, keep coming back to it, and it's like knocking on my head like this crazy thing.
Let me take a crack here. I've argued that the three pillars of apologetics are lies, logical fallacies, and emotional manipulation. And when I argue with theists and debate, if they use any of these things, I point out that they've lost, because their best arguments are these things that are unacceptable. They don't lead to any notion of truth. And if you are using these arguments or using these tactics, then you are sort of admitting that you don't have anything better. And so you are being emotionally manipulated, and if they don't have intellectual arguments that get you to the truth, or reasons to believe in the claims that they're making, then you should ignore them, because they're using slimy, manipulative tactics in order to get you to believe something. And we talked about what's the harm of religion. Well, here's a prime example of, boy, this religion sure is harmful, because it's torturing this person for no reason, and there's no good reason to believe in this religion.
And I tell you this, Teddy, there's another caller waiting, and they have a question about the afterlife. Are you listening to the show, or are only on the phone listening?
I have it on my phone, but does it like last on the phone? If
Oh, you're only listening.
I can pull it up.
I tell you what, let me just put you on hold and take this other caller, because his question may have something about the afterlife that might help you. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I'm just going to put you back on hold for a minute.
Thanks, Teddy.
Oh, okay. Thank you.